thank you all for coming out. We're not going to talk very long because this is a very special treat that we have for you and for our community tonight. My name is Alice Sharp, and I'm the development officer here at Durham County Library. And before I introduce this lady who you all know, I do want to give special thanks to Durham Library Foundation, without whose support we would not be able to have these wonderful series of programs. And I know that there are some current and some former Durham Library Foundation board members out there, so if they would stand so that you could thank them, I'd appreciate that. Many of you have been to quite a few of our humanities programs, and I think you've all found them quite special. What has been special, very special for me over the 5 or 6 years that I've been here has been having wonderful humanities coordinators, and we've just had a ball. And the one that we just had just decided that she just needed to go on and retire and have fun and do wonderful things. But I want to bring Joanne Abel. And I'm going to put her on the spot, and I want her to tell you in her own words just how this program came about.
I thought you organized it.
Well,
Alice actually organized it. And I believe Alice and Joe Harvard talked about how this kind of interesting convergence of these amazing people that have worked together in different, what is the organization? So not Congregations in Action? Yes, Congregation Actions, and many other things, and how they've worked together in many different ways, and they were all retiring or going to retire soon. That we should take this opportunity to bring them together and learn from their wisdom. And Frank Stasio graciously agreed to moderate the program, so that's kind of the synergy of how these programs happen, from community members like Reverend Harvard coming to the library staff, and the library staff kind of working together.
Great. Thanks, Joe. These men, I am a Presbyterian, born Presbyterian, will probably die a Presbyterian, and many of these men have been in the background of my life, as well as the life of Durham for many, many years. Starting with Rabbi John Friedman. From Judea Reform Congregation, Reverend Joe Harvard from First Presbyterian Church, and Haywood, no, I had to put you in with these guys. I'm so sorry, the company could not have been better. Reverend Haywood Holderness, Westminster Presbyterian Church, Reverend Mel Williams, I always say that, I always do that to you. Reverend Mel Williams from Watt Street Baptist Church. As I said, these men have been in the life of Durham for many, many years and have brought about some of the changes that you're going to hear about as well.
I don't count.
Oh.
I don't count.
Okay, let me open. Do I have any more mouths open so I can put both feet in them? Elroy Bishop has been just, have I done it again? Bishop Elroy Lewis. You would think I had never met these men before in my life. And he is from Fisher Memorial United Holy Church. I really do know these men. I really, really do. But just so excited to have them here and be on this program and just tell you a little bit about, as the title suggests, how Durham changed them and how they changed Durham. So before I make another gaffe, I'm going to turn it over to you, Frank.
It's my turn. Thank you, Alice. I am deeply honored to be here and so grateful to the library and these gentlemen. So, 4 ministers and a rabbi walk into a library. It really is an incredible... We're going to talk about this. We don't have a lot of time, and I've got essentially 5 preachers up here, so really we got to get going. But I want to talk about, we're talking about how Durham changed you and the social history, social justice history, and the gospel, and of course, I've read the Gospels, and there's a lot of what would seem to me the social justice fallout, but I also read the letter from the Birmingham jail by Dr. Martin Luther King, who scolded ministers, particularly in white churches, for their lack of help. This is back in 1963. You all got here a little bit later. I'd like to talk with you about your journey and about how you saw your ministry when you got here, what the landscape was when you got here, and whether or not things changed for you in terms of how you saw your mission and your ministry with regard to race and social justice. And I think, Haywood Holderness, you've been here the longest, right? Or you started the earliest. So maybe I can start with you, and I will ask you to pick up the microphone on your right, so that when we have a recording of this, we'll have a good clean print. But tell us about your experience when you were started here. And
Thank you. I came here from Mobile, Alabama. I arrived in December 1973 and began my ministry at Westminster Church in January of 1974. I was so happy to be here. I just loved everybody in this city. I don't know what you know about Mobile, Alabama in the 60s or the 70s, but it probably was the most regressive metropolitan area in the country. There was no tolerance at all in my life down there as far as race relations. And so one of the things I was excited about was coming up here where I knew that this was heaven and Durham would be just fine. When I arrived, the first thing the people told me, that called me, said, "We want to socially and racially integrate our church." It just blew me away. I said, "Let's do it." We never did really do a very good job of it, but at least that was the thing in mind. And when I got here, a man named Bill Smith, any of y'all remember him? Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. He was the pastor of Pilgrim United Church of Christ, called me up a few days after I arrived and said, "I need to get to know you. We're going to take you out to lunch. I'm going to teach you how to get involved in the community." I just said, I have died and gone to heaven. This is where I want to be. And I think more than anybody else, Bill Smith was the influence on my life to say it's okay.
Tell us more about Bill, just briefly give us.
Okay, Bill was a pastor of Pilgrim United Church of Christ.
But he was a good Baptist before that.
Is there such a thing? I ran his city council election. And by the way, your wife used to be a good Presbyterian.
But she married a good Baptist.
Oh, buckle up, folks, buckle up. All right, now back to our show. So you're blown away. You get to a place like Durham, which is still the South, but it's not Mobile, and people are actually asking you, a white congregation, how do we integrate? Can you help us lead the way? You're talking about what year again?
I started January 1, 74.
74. So now you're in the 70s, all right? The city is, at that point, I believe, in the throes of its desegregation struggles with the schools, and
They were.
So there was a lot of tension.
It was quite different from Alabama.
Yeah. So that's how you got started. Well, let's go down the line. I don't know who's next, but Mel Williams, let me ask you about when you got here and what was the landscape when you got here?
Came in the summer of 1988. The smell of tobacco was still in the air. You remember? Sweet smell of tobacco. And one of the first things that I noticed in Durham was that folks were moving a house from Hope Valley to downtown Durham to be Genesis Home. And I thought, that's a crazy thing to do. But that's where I learned that in Durham, folks really do impossible things. Somebody had given a house in Hope Valley, but they needed for the shelter for homeless families at Genesis Home, so they just trucked that house from Hope Valley it's right here, is it? It's right next door, right across the street. So that was one of the first things. And Christine Stock, some of you may remember her blessed memory. Christine said, now at Watt Street, if you want to be in the middle where the action is, you need to get with the missions committee. So that's where I started. And people like Christine Stocks, who did host homes, Jenny Lee, were already out in the community. And so they were really helping me see that that's where I needed to belong. And so I kept saying to my people, the church exists for the sake of those people who are not in it. Now, many church people don't believe that. But I said that over and over at Watt Street, and I think people believe that. Right, Fran? is on the front row. The church exists for the sake of those people who are not in it. So get outside the walls. And so that's been my experience. And there are many great examples with these folks, because I think Joe and Haywood probably ganged up and you got me into being president of Durham Congregations in Action. I'd barely been here a year or two. And there were a few members of my congregation who were mad at me because I was supposed to attend to the church and not the community. But they got over that. And I think in many ways were very, very supportive. But that really got me very involved. And at the same time, I was very concerned about racial reconciliation, and so the first place I went was to First Calvary Baptist. I wanted to find another sister Baptist church so that we could work together, and so we started there, a sister congregation, as many others here have done, and later then segued into Walltown, where we were involved. But the other thing about these folks and Durham is that when the need arises, we get together. And Joe was always good at calling us together. I always remember the 9/11. I mean, we didn't have how many hours to do that, 6 or 7 hours to get the whole community together. But that was done at First Presbyterian. And so that's one of the things that I have appreciated about Durham is that when any need arises, we're going to sound the call and come together. I'll stop there for now.
Bishop Lewis?
I came to Durham from a little place called Bladeboro, North Carolina, that has a sign saying reduce speed ahead. And by the time you reduce speed ahead, there's another side, resume sign saying say speed. I first came to Durham in 1953 and was amazed at Durham because it certainly was different from Bladeboro, North Carolina. Because at that time they had a drugstore that had a fountain in it across the railroad track in the Hayti section. So the first time I sat at a counter where you could do a sundae or drink ice cream soda was at the drugstore that was across the railroad track. And of course that lifted my spirits when I saw that. I did not know that in 1980 that I would be called to pastor Fisher Memorial United Holy Church, which is a church that has a history of once you get there, you don't leave. The first pastor was there after the church was put together, was formed in the year 1884. The first pastor who came there as a real pastor came in 1905, and he stayed there until 1947. The next pastor stayed there from 47 to 80, and then I've been there since 1980. So in 115 years, you have had the same preacher. You've had a succession of preachers who was like co-pastors and then became pastors. I'm getting ready to retire next year. I wanted my brothers to retire and let me know how it was going before I accepted it. They seemed to do pretty good, except one who put his donut on out of the trunk of his car, and he is retired, meaning he's still running.
Well, this is definitely a church then that's out to prove the truth of eternal life, quite clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What would you, in terms of the atmosphere here, the racial atmosphere, social atmosphere, what did you find here, and were you expecting to be as engaged with the other congregations? Was that your experience in other ministries that you've had?
No, it was not. This was actually a shock for me to find out that what happens in the context of Durham. Now, I think it was Dudley Flood who did a workshop some time ago with some leaders of Durham, and he said that Durham is this unusual kind of place where you have about as much equity among black and white as you'll find anywhere you go. You know, you got North Carolina Central University on one side, Duke on the other, You got your banks, but you also that are white, but you also got Mechanics and Farmers Bank. You got your insurance companies, but you also have North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. You have to go a long ways to find that kind of balance in terms of quality, if not quantity. And so that was very moving to me to see that Durham had something going that I had not seen anywhere else. And it's hard to go anywhere else to find what goes on right here in Durham as well.
Well, we certainly want to get into the details of that, but I want to get everybody's experience as well, that initial experience. Rabbi Friedman, if you can tell us kind of when you got here and what you found. Yep, these have own mics. So cool.
Take my
Broke the mic. It's back.
Can't take me anywhere. Hello, everyone. I was, I guess you Christians say, called to Judea Reform Congregation in 1980 in February. And when I heard that I was the choice of the congregation to become their rabbi, the next Sabbath I went to services on Friday night and sat down in what we called in them days the robing room. We all put on our robes and our something that looked sort of like a prayer shawl, a talit. And my mentor and beloved boss, Herman Schallman, took out a newspaper and he showed me that in Greensboro there had just been a shooting of members of the Communist Party by members of the Ku Klux Klan. I had thought of these middle-sized cities in North Carolina as being very progressive, and of this kind of violence being something from the 60s or the 50s, but not happening anymore. And he said to me, Rabbi Schallman said to me, "John, you've got your work cut out for you." I didn't know whether he meant I'd have to learn to shoot or what exactly he had in mind. When I got here, a kind of distraction of the community was the shooting, and people were thinking a lot about it. I found a community which was unlike Chicago. Where do I begin? In Chicago, there were interfaith clergy groups that talked about theology and compared theology, tried to understand our differences of beliefs and practice. And when Rabbi Ephraim Rosenzweig took me to what I thought was going to be such a group in Durham, North Carolina, they were busy trying to deal with the social problems of Durham. They weren't interested in talking about theology. They were interested in building social service organizations and supporting Meals on Wheels. And this group was called Durham Congregations in Action. And in the 80s and 90s, this was an extremely powerful group in Durham. If you wanted something to happen, you started with Durham Congregations in Action. A few years later, St. Philip's decided they wanted to have something more of their soup kitchen than having it on the second floor of the church. They wanted to build a building. They decided to do that right after Haywood and others had roped me into being, I shouldn't say it wasn't roping, I was excited to do it, to being president of Durham Congregations in Action. I was called, yes.
All five of these guys were called.
Right, we got called. We got the call. Oh Lord. I have to tell you that Durham was, this is a digression, a little bit more provincial as to Jews, which led to some other work. Before I was called to be president, I think I was here 2 years when Haywood called me up and said he'd like me to be treasurer of Durham Congregations in Action. Now, he didn't know anything about me except that I was Jewish.
I digress. In 1984, Haywood had joined forces with some other great leaders in this community and organized to raise the money for this building behind St. Philip's, which is, as you know, now has undergone a kind of urban sprawl, and it takes up at least a block and a half down. But what we had in mind was much more modest, and I and all of us who were around then were going around to churches and to civic organizations, Kiwanis and others, raising money. And I remember on one of those occasions, I think actually I was on the dais raising money more than I was on the dais of Judea Reform Congregation. Nancy, don't tell anybody that. And I remember very often I would get someone in those crowds who would say, "Why are the poor my responsibility? Why do I have to give money from my tire store that I work to raise to feed my family to some guy who is a ne'er-do-well?" He didn't use those words exactly. And that was a shock to me. I never, even if people felt that, I never had heard anyone with the chutzpah. Any of you know what chutzpah is? Unmitigated gall. To say that in public. But that was a very common obstacle to raising the money for the Urban Ministry Center. Well, I could go on and on, and I'll do that later.
It's a good start. It's a good start. I want to hear from Joe and get his kind of a little bit about how you started. Again, the landscape that you found, and then I do want to get into that because I think that's a fascinating question. It's how much leadership. I mean, you've all talked about to some extent finding congregations and finding this kind of interfaith zeal and push for social change, and yet the resistance. So I do want to find out more about kind of what the push and pull in the congregations. But Joe Harvard, tell us what you found when you got here and when that was.
I came in 1980, which was the same year that John and Elroy got here. You could decide for yourself, and we won't vote tonight whether that was a good or a bad year for Durham. But we became friends, and Haywood was already here, and he sort of took us all in, and then Mel came later. That's sort of the chronology of all this. But when I got here, I arrived in 1980. Anybody remember what happened on the political scene in 1980? Ronald Reagan was elected president of the United States. And there was a lot of talk about a safety net. Anybody remember hearing the talk about a safety net where it was going to catch the poor when they fell? Well, it didn't work too well. And I found myself, which I had been excited about when I was in Atlanta and was asked to come here, called to come here to be the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in 1980. One of the things that really attracted me was that I was excited about being a church in the heart of the city to see what we could do. But then, it's like the dog that chases the car. When you catch it, then you got it. What are you going to do with it? I was there, and it was 1980, and at our back door, there were lines of people that needed assistance. So we had to try to start quickly determining how we were going to respond to that. And we couldn't respond to it by ourselves. I see Dan Hudgens out there. The Department of Social Services was right across the street. They were struggling with the same thing. And there were other congregations that were working. So we formed a Presbyterian Urban Ministry, and that was it started with a couple of people, and we started trying to meet the needs of people at our door, and that became a very rich experience because not only did you meet, did you try to help them find what they needed, you also got to know them, and you got to see what their struggles were, and I think that affected me. There were a number of volunteers in the life of the church that got involved in that. It transformed all of us. And then I also had just gotten here, and a couple other things happened. I'll echo what Haywood said. Is anybody from Pilgrim United Church of Christ here tonight? All right. Well, you all remember you may not remember Bill Smith, but he was that pastor. Well, he also took me to lunch. and after we had ordered our sandwich or something, he said, I've got a responsibility for you. You've got to be a leader in this community and work on things here. And I said, wait a minute, I just got here. I don't even know the lay of the land. He said, no, and then he told me that it was really important. And then soon after that, I started working with DCIA, and they came to me and they said, we're going to move a house from Hope Valley, which you've already heard, down to downtown Durham, and we want you and your church to give $3,000 to that. I said, what? You would do what? So I said, okay, I was convinced. I went to the session. The session is the governing body of the Presbyterian Church. I said, I have a request. What is it? I said, $3,000. What for? To move a house from Hope Valley downtown. And they looked at me like, oh, we called the wrong guy. we got a case on our hands here, folks. We got to deal with it. And I'll never forget the day that these two big trucks pulled this house down Roxborough Road by First Presbyterian Church and around the corner and got it settled. And it's been an important institution. And that's the way a lot of change came about in Durham. From Presbyterian Urban Ministry, the urban ministry was begun, the soup kitchen, the shelter, Genesis Home, and that's where that's where I got $3,000 to bring a house downtown. But the other thing that was driven home to me was that Durham was different because there was an open commitment to deal with the fact of race, and people were willing to talk about it. Now, that doesn't mean it was all smooth sailing, but I quickly found out and was told by others that almost any issue you deal with in Durham will ultimately get around to be dealing with something about race, because race is a big part of our life here, and we've got to try to find a way to live together with justice and equality.
Amen.
And so that's what five of us sort of saw as our agenda, and we can talk about more specifically.
I do want to talk more about that, because what you outlined so far is what we think of as the province of the church, charitable work. And for a long time, that was the excuse given by many ministers. I think that was the excuse by those white ministers that were being chided by Dr. King in the Birmingham jail. We're serving the needs of the poor, who will always be among us. So that's our job, not to get involved in social action, not to be activists and get involved in social change. When did you first start working together for social change? Maybe you can talk about that, if it was a particular project. And was that a difficult decision? Bishop Lewis.
Yes. I think we began to work together back in either 1986 or 87, when the KKK proposed coming to Durham to recruit, I guess, other members for their organization. There were many organizations that were very upset that group would be coming to town, and we had almost said, how did they have the audacity with a city as progressive as Durham, that this group think they could come to Durham to recruit anybody. We felt they wouldn't have the audacity or the nerve to come to Durham in terms of the fact that it had made racial progress, and we felt that it was a prestigious community, and that even though we fought with each other, we got along pretty good. And one of the things I mentioned earlier is about the institution you have on one side of the track or the other. And Dudley Flood said years ago, and that's why we fight. We fight more in Durham than anywhere else, because we have brothers that are almost equal, they'll fight.
Yeah.
And so we fight more in Durham than anywhere else. And other folks see us fight, and they come to see us fight. And so the KKK proposed coming to Durham, and at that time, we put together a letter, and I found copies of the other, and had a number of copies done. I didn't know how many was going to be here tonight. If I thought you all was coming to hear us preach, I would have got more. But this copy was put together a statement against the KKK and a call to unity. If I might read it, Durham is a progressive city. It has great pride in medical service and sophistication, as well as great pride in education institutions, level of research, each contributing to the present and future well-being of the citizen and beyond. Durham's growth, however, in the racial understanding and social development continues to be impeded by such groups that personify hatred, disseminate social injustice, and proclaim malice. Durham is not the community of a few and should not be characterized by those who are proponents of hatred, malice, and social injustice, who seek to polarize the citizens of Durham. Hatred demeans and diminishes life, while love beautifies and enlarges life. Hatred imprisons and limits life, while love sets free to be. We, the undersigned, stand firmly upon the religious ethic that teaches love, not hatred, peace, not violence, justice, not oppression. We appeal to the good citizens of Durham and the surrounding areas not to honor the Klan's march with your presence. We call upon each citizen of moral integrity and commitment to the racial and social well-being of this city to stand against malice, ignorance, racial hatred, and social injustice. Lend your voice to those who stand for positive, effective social and racial improvement in our beloved city of Durham. This statement was placed in the Durham Morning Herald, and I tried to get the date from the Durham Morning Herald, and they said the microfilm didn't go back that far, or they didn't, especially when it came to a statement. If they wrote an article, we could go back, but that kind of statement, we don't know exactly when that was done. We not only put this statement together that was signed by the Interdenominational Minister Alliance and vicinity, the Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee of Durham, the Durham Chapel Hill Federation of Jewish Organizations. But it was at that the Klan come into town, called three of us together, John, Joe, and myself. That's when we first got together. We put out a call and had a group to meet, citizens to meet on the steps of the Durham courthouse to have a rally before the Klan came to town the next day. We had a number of speeches, a number of prayers, and we did a lot of singing. One of the songs we sang, before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Can't nobody turn me up. I ain't gonna let nobody. Bad English. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on talking, keep on walking, marching up to freedom land. And another one, we sang, I'm gonna lay down my burden, my sword and shield by the riverside, and study war no more. At the end of that rally, we told those gathered that they needed to stay home on Sunday and let the Klan walk through an empty Durham community. Many did that. A few said, well, when you got a snake coming to town, at least a few of us need to be out here to make certain the snake leaves. And so a few persons decided they would be there to watch the Klan. The Klan came, the Klan left, and until this day, the Klan has not been back to Durham in hoods and sheets. Might be here, but not in hoods and sheets.
Yeah. I just want to give you all a picture of one of the most moving moments in my time in Durham. Was a whole lot of people came to that rally that took place. I mean, we were surprised. There were a lot of people, several hundred. The whole area out there was full. So we decided that the bishop should lead us. And when we marched around the courthouse, Bishop Lewis leading us all singing, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round." And that was a very moving moment, and I want to thank you for that. Yeah.
I think we should thank the Klan too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a great.
Love your enemy.
There's a. Well, I don't love them. You can love them on my behalf. Their coming galvanized us. In many ways, we were not a united religious community to the same extent before they came as after they came, and I'm not sure we saw as clearly as we did after they left or slithered out, how important it was for us to have this kind of relationship, and how much stronger we are when we stand together. That was a great lesson, and if the Klan hadn't come, we might have learned it eventually, but not as quickly. It's one of the wonderful synergies of Durham that we have that sense of cooperation, of mutuality among the clergy. I don't mean just us; we're just the best-looking examples, but among the clergy in general here. And I hope, now that I'm retired and young Elroy here is on his way, I hope that is a spirit that is passed on to the new generation of clergy in Durham, and that will be felt and strongly carried on. Certainly, we see so many efforts on the part of leadership efforts on the part of the clergy in Durham even today that it's very reassuring.
Reverend Holderness, let me ask you to follow up on that. Galvanizing events like that can bring community, certainly the leadership together, congregations show up, they sing, and you achieve success. What about the fallout, the aftermath, about bringing congregations together for a deeper understanding of communities that they may not have grown up with? Is there that kind of follow-through? What's your experience with that?
I think, as has already been stated, that Durham Congregations in Action, all these guys have served as president of it at one time or another, did as much to bring interfaith cooperation, or at least understanding, as anything else that I can remember in my years here in Durham. Doesn't have the same power or influence that it once had, but I've talked to my colleagues in other towns and talk about Durham Congregations in Action, and they say, "Oh, is that just for Presbyterians, or is that just for Baptists, or is it just for white folks?" But DCIA, as it was created, stayed that way, with a mixture of races and a mixture of faiths, and still is that way to some extent.
What are some of the events or events that you remember that help bring people together?
I think raising money brought people together.
His name is Haywood.
I mean, we raised a bunch of money to build the Urban Ministry Center, to build the shelter, to get the Genesis home moved from Hope Valley out here. And that money didn't come from one person or one congregation. It came from all over the city. And, when folks give together to the same thing, they don't believe me, but when folks give together to the same thing, they generally become closer. And the crop walk, yeah.
I'd like to say one thing about what Elroy said. The Ku Klux Klan rally brought us together, and we started something. But it wasn't long after that, and I'm not sure this would have been as powerful as it was. It wasn't long after that. Some of you remember in 1985, Durham elected a young mayor, Wib Gully.
Yeah.
And in 1980, he was elected in November of 1985. He took office in December. In January, as every mayor that has succeeded him, he issued a proclamation against discrimination. and that had been done by mayors before him. But Wibb was convinced, a young man had been beaten severely at the Eno River because he was gay. And so Wibb thought that he should put into that proclamation, not only should people not be discriminated because of race or gender or economics, but also because of sexual orientation. And he went on to say, the proclamation did, which he signed, went on to say that no one should be harmed because of their sexual orientation. That sounds pretty mild, but that caused a huge uproar. There was a move to recall him, and I remember one day I went out and picked up the Durham Morning Herald, and a headline said, "Religious leaders oppose mayor and lead effort for recall." And I was walking back into the house, and I thought, wait a minute, I think I'm a religious leader. I don't oppose Wibb Gully. I like the guy. I voted for him. I hope he did. So I said, let me take with John and Elroy and Haywood. And you weren't here yet. You were on the way. So I called them, and they said, no, this is a civil rights issue, that gays and lesbians be treated fairly and not harmed. So once again, as we clergy are good to do, we issued our own proclamation. What had happened is that the folks that they started a campaign to recall the mayor. They had 90 days to do it, and we started a campaign to support the mayor. And theirs failed, and ours succeeded. And I talked to Wibb about that recently, and I think that particular event sent a signal to people outside of Durham that Durham is a safe and welcoming place for people who are different in some ways. And it also said something to us. It said that's the kind of community we are, and that's the kind of community we want to be. And I think that was a very pivotal moment. You're talking about us trying to deal with the social policy.
Right.
And Joe, the group that we that came together as an ad hoc group was the Durham concerned minister, clergy in Durham. And anytime there was an event that was going to create a problem, issue, or disturbance in the context of the community, the concerned clergy would meet that then engendered or brought together some 40 or 50 of us, even though the three of us were responsible for putting it together.
What about your congregations? Did you get pushback? And Mel, let me start with you. Pushback from your congregations when you took a stand like this?
Some at first, but I think gradually the congregation saw the importance of all the reconciliation work and the community work, and really supported it. And another example you may recall is when the schools consolidated. Talk about the anti-discrimination. And it was Durham Congregations in Action who held a citywide celebration of education, really celebrating the coming together of the city and the county schools. And again, that was arose from clergy and people of faith to support that. And I think generally our congregations have supported those efforts. To me, the whole issue of racial reconciliation is something that we continue to work on. In our meeting yesterday in Poverty Durham, and Ms. Eaton is here, but the R word, she said to us, the R word, and it's racism. We still have to deal with racism in this community and racial inequity, and that is a continuing mission. Our work is not done. And I think part of that is for us I now want everyone, since I've been retired, taking racial equity training to understand what's happening, that the economic system of this country, of this city, is controlled by white privilege. And that shuts out so many people of color. And we have to continue to work on that and help, especially all of us who have privilege and power, to begin to see that it needs to be distributed. because my friends in East Durham are seeing the Renaissance in downtown and the Chesterfield building being given $12 million in incentives and saying, why isn't some of that money coming to East Durham? Well, you see the inequity that's happening. We certainly support the Renaissance downtown, but it still continues to be unequal. And our friends who are African American, Latino are not. It's not a level playing field, folks. A long way from it. So that's. Sorry, I've gone to preaching there, but that's the
No, I think you're right where you need to
Time
be.
for the
because
anthem.
Separation, because racial separation. I think 11 o'clock Sunday morning still is the most segregated, right? And so here's something. I mean, what is the role now of churches of actually bringing the people of this community together to break bread, to live, to worship together? I think that separation is really at the source of a not just more work to be done. There is a growing problem that I sense in this, and it has to do with not living in the same zip codes.
We had a faith summit on child poverty. Some of you were there in 2013, and one of the initiatives, the priorities that came out of that is to develop intentional relationships across the lines of privilege and poverty, race and class. How do we do that? Certainly we hope, and some of our congregations are integrated, but we need intentional efforts. And our attempt in Real Durham, Spencer's here involved in that, others are involved in that initiative, is bringing together people who are living in material poverty, largely African Americans and perhaps some Latinos, with middle class allies coming together every Monday night so that we can get to know one another. That is so very important because our congregations do remain largely segregated with some difference, but I think we have to look for those intentional ways to bring us together.
I think it's important to note that we live in a very different Durham than we did in those days. In 1985, I started taking my 10th graders around to different congregations for them to experience for a semester worship in various kinds of religious communities. In those days, it meant we went to Christian churches plus the Friends and the Sikh temple. And we went to about 11 places. Last year, we went to some Christian churches, but we also went to a humanist Buddhist congregation, the Sikh temple, a Hindu congregation, and of course the masjid and Al-Razak Masjid, and there are a lot more different kinds of people in Durham. We're a lot less homogeneous than we used to be. So the racial issues have become more complicated in many ways. We need work on race relations. I fully agree with everything Mel said. We also need to do what we can to bring the very many different kinds of people who are part of this community into the core of religious life, into the core of our interfaith work and community building in Durham.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think one of the things that we discovered was these pastors, we discovered that when a big event would happen, like the beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles, that there would be different reactions among blacks and whites to that, or the O.J. Simpson verdict, or I could go on and name a lot of things that happened. So that led us to say, we're not talking to each other. So we developed relationships with congregations, and Bishop Elroy Lewis and Bishop Memorial United Holy Church and First Presbyterian became partner congregations. And we sat down and talked about race and economics. And I remember some of the most moving sessions I've had. And I think that kind of conversation still needs to go on. The other thing we did in about 1985-86, we started an organization that many of you know and have worked and supported called Habitat for Humanity. And Habitat works across racial and economic lines, and people working together get to know each other. and African American communities, Jewish communities. We built one with Judea Reform, and they came to us and they said, now, one thing we want to be clear about, we know that Habitat was founded as a Christian organization. You're not going to be proselyting us, are you? And we said, oh, no, that's the last thing we do. We First Presbyterians, we don't even know, we haven't even discovered the word evangelism yet. We're still working on it. But then we sent out a letter to members of the congregations telling them that we were going to start the build, and the first day would be so-and-so, and we'd gather, and we said, and your site supervisor is going to be Jesus. No, Jesus. And we called us up and they said, I thought you said there was going to be no Christian. Jesus is going to be our supervisor.
I think if persons who attended the Durham congregations in action on Tuesday saw something that we had practiced earlier. Which one? You had persons representing the Christian faith, the Islam. I'm the one doing that.
Just let go of the cord.
Let go of the cord. All right. Yeah. But anyway, if you were at DCIE on yesterday, you saw Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'i. Years ago, we had that group, a religious group, coming together each year. And when that group is brought together and you raise up the issue of how do you pursue justice, it sounds like one religion was talking. How do you pursue peace? It sounded like one religion was talking. How do you build family? It sounded like one religion was talking. And what we brought that group together to do is to show that we are more there's more sameness and tameness and less lameness whenever we talk to each other and work with each other and try to get along with each other, since we are not going to be one in any other way. So we saw that happening again on yesterday in the DCIA meeting, but we used to do that with the Martin Luther King Steering Committee for a number of years until many of us got old and some got into nursing facilities and what have you, and it just died. But I was kind of glad to see that at least the concept was revived on yesterday in the Durham congregations in action. One other thing I need to say when we're talking on this racial issue. John, Joe, and myself and our congregation.
Let go of the cord.
Cord again.
Let go and let
Put
God.
my hand down. I got old and a little shaky, you know. Yeah. But anyway, we put together a group to go to Israel in 2000. I call us PPP, Pentateuch Keepers, Presbyterian and Pentecostals. Triumvirate. We went to Israel and we spent time together in Jerusalem. We decided we'd go to each congregation, that is Jewish congregation, and then we'd also go to a Christian church when that service was had on a Sunday. We'd go to a Jewish congregation on Saturdays. I was one of the most dressed up persons there.
And they told me, person there.
Yeah. And they told me I was getting into trouble because I went all the way to Israel, Jerusalem, attended Episcopal church, Anglican church on a Sunday morning. They came to me to be one of the ushers. I was like the little cat that went to see the king, the queen. And when you got to see the queen, all you could do was run a little red under the chair. I was a child bishop, but I was a usher in the Anglican church in Jerusalem on a Sunday morning. But the important thing that happened at that meeting, we were at the airport, and of course they took us aside to ask how did this group get together, because they saw that we were different. They saw whites and Jews, and African Americans were here together. And they asked one of the members of the group, how did you all get together? Who is this group? And they said, well, you know what? You got the reverend, the rabbi, and the bishop. And we've been working together. They say, ain't nobody like that in this world. And they had a problem with the fact that we were able to go all the way to Israel and Jerusalem and relate to each other in that way.
I think we're going to have time for a couple of questions. I have one, and I don't. Do we have a? We're going to hook up a mic. We'll have a couple of questions. Yeah, we're going to bring a mic over so that we can get it on tape. But yes, ma'am. Go ahead and yell it out, and I'll repeat it. Yes, ma'am. In the white shirt and yeah. Yep, that's right. There we go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I assure you I speak with humility, but I speak with certainty. I'm not a theologian or a rabbi, but I lived 52 years with a very committed theologian who was very well educated. And when I contemplate the change in Durham, now I did live here before. I lived here when Haiti existed. And I'm back in my old age. I'm 85 and a half. Marched across the Selma Bridge, penned in First Baptist Church, Ralph Abernathy's church by the Ku Klux Klan. Didn't think I would come out alive. But very quickly, I could talk for hours, but very quickly and seriously, when I contemplate the changes that I observed in Durham, I see serious regression. I used to take pride in driving my guests around, and we looked at the Durham skyline and saw North Carolina Mutual Insurance Building. I'm aware that education has regressed, and that is documented by Obama's major professor, Attorney Charles Ogletree. I read the statistics and I learned that America has more incarceration than any other G7, G8, G20, anybody on the planet. And I am aware that the black agenda has been subordinated. So I'd like to pose a question to you, because I do feel that the great equalizer is still education, and the progress should be measured. Yes, we do live in a global community of various religions, but first and foremost, we live in a community of human beings. And having lived 52 years with a very progressive minister, I can live comfortably with the fact that different groups call their deity and characterize their deity graphically in different ways. But we as human beings, the mental health of this country is in the toilet, because racism is a psychopathological disease. Now, what can we do about that?
Thank
We need a couple more hours for that question.
Well, let me ask you it this way, because I think it's a very thoughtful question, and I've noticed the regression myself. I will tell you, when we do shows on stories of some kind of heroism or someone who's been in a degrading situation and there's a real polarity, it's very easy for people to hear that story. But honestly, when we do the hard conversations about privilege, white privilege, and we document it, and we talk about the ways in which white privilege is built into our tax code, our education system, our highway system, our electoral system, that's when our inbox fills up with hate mail. And it always starts out, I love your show, I listen all the time, you're very progressive, I am too, but, and it's sort of, I'm going to think of doing a cartoon series called Racist But. to be a but with because I'm not a racist but, and I'm thinking, well, who is racist but? But who is racist but? Because you're not, but somebody is. And my point is, and I'm sorry, the reason I got off on this little tangent too is to say that that's when we have really touched a nerve. That's when people get very upset with us because everybody's comfortable not being a racist but when they are, when confronted with their own privilege, the fact that they have unconsciously are participating in a system that encourages this kind of thing and exacerbates the problem, I am participating in a system that encourages and makes things worse. That's when people get mad at me. And I wonder, sort of how the churches are going to tackle that problem.
There's a group out of Chapel Hill that's called OAR, or Organization Against Racism, that works to do groups, seminars, workshops to show how you dismantle racism brick by brick. Racism is a big cathedral that has been built, and the only way you take it down is start from the way it started, and that is you got to start from where it began. And it began with the American original sin, thinking that every man or every woman is not made in the image of God, that some are and some aren't. So it has to go back to the very beginning, and this group does a good job taking apart racism brick by brick, because it's a cathedral, and you don't take it down overnight.
I think also that the whole white privilege issue is one that's really difficult to deal with. One of the things I've been reflecting on in a lot of churches, and the church where I am right now, they do a lot of mission trips. And people go to Haiti, they go to Belize, they go, and they come back and they work with people who don't have a whole lot. They try to help them a lot. Don't have a whole lot materially. They do have a lot, but they don't have a lot materially. And people come back and say, that was a life-changing experience. And I say, really, how's it going to change your life? They've seen the gap, but what do we do about it? And I think that's the question that we possibly get on.
There are, an answer, no. When we speak about white privilege and racism in our community or everywhere, we're talking about a very complex phenomenon. This is the white privilege, racism, these are constructs, and they are made of many building blocks. And if you ask me what we have the most power to try and change to eat into the racism that afflicts us, it's in the effort that we should be putting forward to rebuild the public schools.
Yes.
If we were going to take one step that would really help us to come together, it would be to give a strong message at election time. Can I say that here? I'm retired, that's fine. At election time, that we are not going to stand for the evisceration of our public schools.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. One more question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. We're going to get you a mic in 1 second, and there you go.
Thank you. I've lived in Durham for 67 years, and I have yet to see the positives that we're talking about. I know there are some in my community who have made it, but the majority of us have not. And I've discussed this with Mel and Haywood Holderness. There have been 35 murders in Durham this year so far. But I have yet to see our religious community stand publicly and say, this will stop. And when you figure out what it is, how racism has played into self-hatred, not knowing who you are, not knowing where health care is coming from, self-medicating, because I live not too far from Bishop Lewis's church. But I see the homeless out there. I see the ones hanging on church corners because they have nowhere to go. My thing is, when will people of faith ever stand up and publicly demand not only social justice, but financial justice for me and my community? As long as we're doing charitable things, giving, charity is good and it helps, but it's not justice. And America has not lived up to what it owes our community.
Well, let's get an answer to that question if we can, or at least take a stab at it.
Ta-Nehisi Coates has written a book on reparations. I mean, it's in the Atlantic magazine last summer. And if any of you have gotten his book, Between the World and Me, it just was given the National Book Award. It's tough reading for us white folks, but I think it's very, very important to read it because it's really a lament. And how do we bring about transformation among those of us who are leaders, and I'm sure that there are all leaders in this room, but we also have political leaders and social leaders in this room. It's really the liberation of white people that's needed.
Yes.
We have often quoted the motto from the Aborigines woman, Lila Watson, who said, "If you've come here to help me, Charity, forget it. But if your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together." I'm not sure we believe that we need to be liberated, but we really do need to be liberated from this demon of white privilege and the white power structure that has shut out so many people. But it's so difficult for us to get hold of it because it's the air we breathe, and we've grown up with it, and we say, well, what's wrong with it? Or you hear people say, I pulled myself up on my bootstraps, why can't everybody else? Well, Irish Americans came over here and pulled themselves up, and you can name other good Italians came over. Were they enslaved when they came over? I mean, is that heritage of slavery, and Mr. Coates is really helping us understand this, and there are many others doing it, but I think we really do need a lot of self-examination, especially the faith community, before we can really move out and do something about it in strategic ways. And it really does mean changing a system, Frank, because the system is just fraught with it, including the Durham system. It really is.
But it does suggest, doesn't Mel, that we not sort of take it personally. So I am responsible for the amount of benefit that I have received unearned as a white male. I'm responsible for that. That doesn't mean I have to take it personally, or that I have to call myself a nasty name, or endure being called a nasty name. It means I have to come to terms with that fact, acknowledge that, and then in the way that we've seen great negotiators in the Bible, whether it's Moses negotiating with God over sort of keeping the project going, right? Don't, it'll look bad. It's bad PR, right? Didn't he say that? It's bad publicity. It's going to look bad for you. Or Peter's denials and reconciliation and deep understanding. I mean, it's in our faith tradition to fail and stand up and move forward. That's what the tradition is, and not to pretend that we are somehow gifted beyond our means. So, I mean, I think that's one of it. I do want to ask you all a question, too, before we leave, about the current situation, the refugee situation in the United States, and some of the talk that we've heard from the highest circles of government here in our state with regard to people in need.
I would love to say something about that. That very much concerns me. I think all of us are overwhelmed by the tragedy in Paris, and something's got to be done about ISIS. I think we all know that. But what we can't do is blame that on our Islamic brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters. And I want to call out one person who he's not up here tonight only because he's not retired. But Abdul Wahid has been a leader in our community of bringing the Muslim community together with Christians, Jews. I know he's got a broken leg. Can you stand up?
Wave your hand, Abdul.
Would you like to say something?
Thank you. This is a very important occasion. And one of the things, when I first came to Durham in 1991 from New York, I was already conditioned for healthy interfaith relations. My late leader, Wallace D. Muhammad, over 30 years ago, he had encouraged us to have healthy faith relationships. So when I came to Durham and I met those fine young men up there, it made it much more easier for me as a Muslim in this community. And when I came here, I'm sure that there was very limited, I think, appreciation for Islamic life at that time. We worked real hard with the help of those men up there. I have to say that because they trailblazed and they made sure that we were included in a very healthy way, and we were seen as a part of this community from the very outset. So that's very important to me. One other thing I would like to say, and that is that as an African American man growing up in the streets of Harlem, New York, having gone through certain trials and tribulations as a young man, and God blessed me to realize what a man is over 37 years ago when I became a Muslim. And so I know there's possibilities for our young men in these streets. There's possibilities. And one of the things that I can remember thinking, and we just have to change our thinking. I remember thinking once I was incarcerated, and I remember thinking that when I get out, I'm going to do what I was doing before, and I'm going to ride around. My son at that time was like 5 years old. And then it dawned on me. I said, man, you're going to get your son killed. And I changed. And I believe that these young men out here today, they can do the same. They can change. And it only takes a new word environment for them to come into the right information, and they can change. And I know change only comes about when you want it yourself. You gotta want it bad enough. And I think this is the key for our community. I know what we've been through. But we've also been through a lot of tremendous leadership. Going back from Dr. King, Carter G. Woodson, Nat Turner, Elijah Muhammad. I mean, we've had great leaders. So we're missing something because we haven't gotten the message from these leaders all these years, and we're still singing the same song. We can't sing that song. We got to sing more of a song. We got a newborn grandson, and I'm going to be finished. We got a newborn grandson, Isaria, 3 months old. When you study children, one thing that God put in the nature of every human being to want to do for yourself. Study children. When they start walking, they begin to fall, and you reach for them, they'll give you this look like, leave me alone. I got this. And that's what we have to do as a community. We got to say, I got it, and grab that bull by the horn and don't stop running with it.
Yes.
Any of you read Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times this morning? Well, I want to repeat briefly what he said because it is a kind of response to what Frank asked us. In the 30s and 40s, the United States was the leader among nations in ignoring the need of Jews to leave Europe. The reason that was given by those who were isolationists was in part economic, but mostly that Jews were communists. I don't know where that comes from, but there was that association, and they didn't want more communists coming to the United States. The leaders of our states and in our Congress who don't want the immigrants from Syria to come to the United States are exhibiting the same tendentious lying and fears that their grandpappies, I think they were all pappies, I don't know if there were any mammies in the Congress, exhibited in the 1930s and 40s. Fear twists us. It causes us to think things that are not just wrong, but harmful and hurtful to our communities and to the world. Religious people need to stand up and say, well, wait a minute, that's why we have these texts. That's why we have Psalms. That's why we have the Talmud. That's why we have the New Testament. That's what Jesus was about. So, I hope that all of us here will take that to heart, if we don't already have it there, and stand up and speak against people who are afraid and whose fear is corroding us.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you. As I said, it's a real honor to be on the same stage as these gentlemen who have done so much for our community. There are a lot of questions about whether this can be done as a humanist enterprise, whether it should only be a humanist enterprise, and what faith has to do with it. But at the very least, we can see in this community that people of faith have had an enormous difference, that there is something about believing in the transcendent and being at one with something that is intangible, and then coming to terms with our very material, very corruptible selves, to bring all of that to bear on the problems that are ineffable, indescribable, and yet ours to manage, is I think, the height of courage and the height of responding to a call in the most humane and divine way. And I'm deeply honored to be in your presence, and I thank you all for being here tonight.